For the past 2 weeks, I've been exploring whether or not it's possible to create high quality 3D artwork without being tied to a desk with no compromises to my current workflow. Could I keep using the tools that I love using with a truly mobile workstation without adding any unnecessary bulk? Let's find out. G'day everyone, Dicko here with another kick-ass walkthrough and review. A few months ago, Huion contacted me and sent me this guy, the Canvas Pro 13 display tablet. It is the 2.5K edition. Now, unfortunately at the time, I couldn't actually review it. I was so busy with other projects, and then suddenly I had to move house. Our lease expired. We had to go from one place to another over the holidays, and my office is still an absolute wreck. But that presented me with an opportunity to see how this thing goes as part of a mobile workstation. Can this tablet and this laptop replace my desktop setup and allow me to do everything I do normally as a creative professional? Now, this one's a really interesting one because I think this is a really cool little combination. And to test this out, I'm using this tablet and this laptop to create this fun little 3D scene of the Loch Ness Monster being attacked by someone, and they don't even notice it happening. I thought it was really fun to put it together. It's a really cartoony, fun, I don't know, something that I would do as a little sketch normally, just for fun, instead of the regular sort of hot chick 3D model that seems to get views on this channel. So just like any other video, I've gone through the entire process here, including concept art, modeling, sculpting, and texturing, and then finally some rendering to get this project done. And I've used the tablet and the laptop for the entire process. And I've used it everywhere. I've used it outdoors on the table, like I see here. I've used it on my bed at night while watching TV, basically everywhere around the house that isn't my office. And it was a good way of testing whether or not this would work even outside of the house. So basically at a library, or maybe at a mobile office, or if you're doing a share space or you need to do a little meeting or a collab. This setup, I think, is going to be really interesting to check out. So follow along, see how the workflow is done, watch how I've made this 3D model, and get some thoughts on this tablet as well. So stick around and let's jump right in. All right, so starting from the top here with the sketch and the concept art, I like to start with a 50% gray canvas in Photoshop, and then just start with a really basic sketch. It doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to be anything miraculous or like requires a shitload of skill. Just whatever is fun to draw, especially when you're doing something that is experimental and you're trying to learn new things with. Once I've nailed that sketch down, I can begin to start to color it in and go with a color palette that I'm happy with. And for this one, I wanted to keep the environment relatively gloomy, like the Scottish Highlands, but have a bunch of color coming out of the actual creature. So Nessie here would have to be really punchy and really, really colorful. As for what you get with the Pro 13, you get the tablet, obviously. You get the pen stylus and a bunch of nibs and a little holder for it. Unfortunately, the pen itself doesn't come with an eraser tip on the other side, but you do get this really nice stand that comes out of the box. And of course, to cap it all off, you get a drawing glove and a cleaning cloth for your screen. Now, jumping back into the drawing here, so far the responsiveness of the tablet has been really, really good. I've been trying out different techniques with the drawing, and it's been really responsive. For the colors, I really wanted the character to be really punchy and stand out from the gray clouds of the scene. So it has to be really vibrant, really silly, and just contrast with the seriousness of the environment itself. And to cap it all off, I went with a vibrant orange boat to sit in the ocean to allow the viewer to look at different parts of the image and have a little fun with it. And also the orange contrasts nicely with the teals and greens of the environment itself as well. And here is the final result of that concepting session. Now, this is going to be really helpful for me to guide myself through the 3D process because I have a direct reference. Okay, so the fun thing about doing the sketching is that I basically did the entire concept art in bed in one session. And that was really kind of interesting to see because firstly with the MacBook, there's basically no fan heat coming out from the bottom of the laptop, so I can actually set this on the bed without any issues. The other thing is that I can actually set this on my lap, the tablet on my lap, and just do my sketching like I would with a regular iPad and still have the power of using Photoshop or any tool for that matter that I like to use on the desktop without any compromise, which is really cool. I really enjoyed that process, and when I'm strapped for time, sometimes I just got to do my sketches wherever I can, and sometimes it's in bed. So yeah, really cool to see how well that worked out. All right, so I'm going to jump into Blender now and do a little bit of modeling, a little bit of sculpting, and see how this thing performs in that environment. Okay, I just want to quickly show you the setup I used for this sort of workstation setup. Now, oddly enough, the stand became really useful as a laptop stand than a tablet stand because it allows me to reach out for the keyboard a lot more easier than propping up the tablet on the stand and having to reach over that to grab to the keyboard shortcuts. But overall, it was a really nice, quick setup. And the great thing about this tablet, which isn't listed on the box or anywhere on the website, is that you can do a single cord power and data connection with USB-C to USB-C. And without that, you'd basically be tied to a desk that would have to be near a power outlet to make this thing run. So that's a fantastic advantage for this setup. Okay, so the modeling of this creature is stupidly simple. It's basically a simple set of extrusions to make the shape of Nessie, and then I use a multi-res modifier to sculpt in all the details. It was a really simple setup, and that's why I chose this design, because I really wanted to just jump straight into sculpting without having to think too much about anatomy and think about proportion and all that sort of crap. I really just wanted to have fun with this tablet, have fun with the method, and just make something silly. Okay, so you may notice that I'm actually using the multi-res modifier for this particular sculpt. Now, I actually wasn't planning on doing that. I just did it by accident, basically. But it does come with some advantages. Namely, the geometry underlying this multi-res is pretty simple, which means it could technically be rigged if I really wanted to, and I can animate it if I really wanted it to. The other thing is that it can be easily UV unwrapped and then sent to Substance Painter or some other texturing software to do some more detailed texturing other than using it in Blender. So I've gone with that method in the future, but the alternative method would be to just do a traditional sculpt where you're basically adding more and more geometry with Dintopo over the original mesh. You're effectively destroying the mesh each time you do a brush stroke, but you do have the flexibility of just painting any way you wish, or rather sculpting any way you wish, that is. With that, you can do a vertex paint on top of that to do effectively texturing, like simple texturing, where you're actually painting the vertices a certain color to represent the colors that you want. Now, for the scales, I really wanted to try and sculpt in scales rather than relying on texturing alone. And for this, I didn't really want to use any preset brush packs either. So I went into Photoshop and quickly made a scale pattern using the tools inside of Photoshop. Now, this is actually quite a lot of fun when you're making your own patterns. So the nice thing about Photoshop is that it has a pattern preview function inside the canvas. So you can actually expand the canvas outwards and it will tile it for you to give you a preview of how that pattern will look. And you can even paint outside the canvas to get it to sort of blend and have a seamless texture, which is really cool. The great thing about this is that if you want to have painterly looking textures, and you want to have tileable textures, you can do that like this and get a really effective result. Not only just for sculpting, but for texturing as well, which is really cool. And then all you got to do after that is export the image as a black and white file back into Blender, and then you can use it as you see fit as a textured brush. On top of that, I've gone ahead and just manually sculpted in other details, like a little bit of horns here and there on the spine, some sort of lip areas around the mouth, and just general detail here and there. So little wrinkles, little boils, that sort of stuff around the creature itself. And that gives it a little bit more character, a little bit more shape, and allows it to catch light in different ways as well. And as for the eyes, they're just cartoon eyes, so they're just going to be spheres stuck on the face. I'm not actually going to bother about it being realistic by any means, because again, the camera is going to be fairly fixed as well. I'm not going to be rotating around the creature that much. But if I was, I'd be a bit more careful about that. After that, just creating the tongue. And once I've finished the mouth, I will jump into doing the other parts of the environment, like the ocean and the boat. So for things like the teeth, they're basically just cubes that I've shrunk and squished. And then I add a little bit of a bevel on the bottom half of the cube, and then essentially turn that into a rounded little edge. That allows me to get these cartoony teeth. They're really simple, and then I just duplicate them across, and that's all we really need for that. And the story is similar for the boat. where I'm basically using primitives to build out the shape of the boat, and then I extrude where needed, or I duplicate where needed to create the overall shapes for that boat. Now this one's a really simple looking thing. I want to give it a little bit of a cartoony edge, so a little bit of wonkiness here and there, but nothing too crazy. As for the different elements of the boat, again, as you can see, all very simple primitives. For the small details, I didn't even bother really with any kinds of array modifiers or anything like that because I really couldn't be bothered, so they're just duplicates of each other. The only thing I did use a modifier for was to mirror out some of the details, so stuff like the poles or the ropes. It just makes sense to mirror those out, but as for every individual piece, nah, can't be bothered. And as for the ropes and railings, they're all just curves with a little bit of a bevel value in the curve settings. Now you may notice I'm not bothering with anything to do with the background because we're going to do a little trick using the original concept art to pad out the scene a little bit, and we'll get to that later. Okay, so considering that I did the sculpt using the multi-res modifier in Blender, it gives me the opportunity to do a quick UV unwrap and then do the texturing in Substance Painter, which is what I've done here. Now, normally when I do a sculpt, I don't bother about using the multi-res that much because I prefer to just do a really rough sculpt using just dynamic topology or just a one-off mesh that I'm going to retopo, and then I would possibly do a vertex painting sort of texturing process for that. That is possible in Blender, but given that I have the opportunity to do it in Substance Painter, let's just jump right in and have a go. Okay, so as we jump into the texturing process of this little Nessie here, you may notice that we have a bit of an issue with my screen recording. There's these black bars on the left and right. Now that is just because my MacBook Pro plus the tablet itself both have a 16:10-ish aspect ratio. Now that means you get more vertical space but less of a wider screen to play with. Now if you're using a standard widescreen monitor and then using the tablet here, you're going to get the opposite effect where you'll get black bars on the tablet on the top and the bottom, which unfortunately means that you're not going to be able to fully utilize the entire screen space of this tablet for your work. Now that's not really that much of an issue because you can map the pen to work with that 16:9 aspect ratio anyway, so you're not going to get any offsets. You shouldn't, at least technically. Now back on the topic of the texturing process, as you can see, my textures so far have been really simple. The layers have been really simple. I'm just blocking out my basic colors and then masking them out using the masking tools inside of Substance Painter. Now this is a method that I'll probably just do the same thing inside of Photoshop if I was doing it there. Now with Blender, unfortunately, you'd have to go ahead and basically create a mask, a manual mask texture in the node editor if you wanted to keep everything, relatively speaking, non-destructive. So that's a real pain in the butt. Here it's pretty dynamic. You just push a mask on and then you're on your way. But I will say that if you really do want to have that ultimate flexibility and ultimate sort of changeability inside of Blender, you can technically do this inside of Blender. It just requires a lot more work and time. Now, I wanted to also add a little bit more detail in the skin regions where I didn't sculpt in any detail, and that's where the Substance library comes into play here. There was a couple of dragon scale textures that were available on the Substance library that I was able to download and apply to Nessie over here. So that really allowed me to add that little bit of punch, a little bit more detail here and there, which made it feel a little bit more complete. The nice thing about these as well is that they're fully editable, non-destructive, and if I don't like them, I can always just remove them and go in a different direction. Now, the cool thing about all of this is that I was able to do most of this work outdoors, in the fresh air, at the table in the patio, without really worrying about anything. I was able to work in the same way I would normally work at my desk. And because of the MacBook Pro's pretty good battery life, I was able to spend a good 3 or 4 hours working on this project. Now that might not sound like a lot of time, but you got to consider the fact that the MacBook is actually powering the tablet as well as taking the commands from the pen input and the shortcuts that I'm pressing on the tablet itself, which is really kind of cool. So with the major part of the body complete, it was only really the last few details required to be done inside of Substance Painter. So stuff like the teeth, the tongue, and the fin, they were all done pretty quickly in about 15-20 minutes. Once that was done, it was now time to get the model ready for export out of Substance Painter back into Blender. So basically, we would export out these textures. I exported them out at 2K. I could have done it at 4K, so you can see a little bit of pixelation in the render in certain details at the end. but I think it came out pretty good in the end as well. And if I really wanted to re-render this with a higher resolution texture, I can just upscale it in Substance and then export them right out and re-import them. Okay, so one of the things I've noticed about this tablet is that it's actually not that small. This is a 13-inch tablet, but if you look at it in terms of its size proportion relative to this 16-inch laptop, so here's a laptop there's the size of that, it actually is bigger than the actual laptop, but not much bigger. So if you were to put this in a bag with this laptop, I don't think you're going to have that much of an issue. That being said, I feel like you can probably scale this down a little bit more and make it a little bit more pocketable. So if you're rocking a 13-inch laptop, for instance, and not the 16-inch MacBook Pro like I have here, you would kind of want this to be a little bit smaller, I think. And given that the screen space is relatively small in proportion to the actual footprint of this thing, trimming it down a little bit would probably benefit somewhat, I reckon. Apart from that, it's a really functional tablet. It does everything you want it to do. It has great pressure sensitivity. It has really good color, I think. It's actually quite a bright display relative even to this thing here, which is really cool. And the resolution is just about right, I reckon. I think it's, if you were to go any higher, like 4K, it'd be an absolute waste of space. And if you want a cheaper alternative, Huion actually sells a full HD version of this as well. So if you don't care about the resolution, you can go to full HD instead of 2.5K and still get a really great tablet as well. So I'd say check those out too. And as for a professional tablet that works well with this, I had no issues. The drivers worked really quickly. Installation was super fast. And the great thing about it is that it's a one cable connectivity. So only one cable needed to connect from this laptop to this tablet. So again, in terms of portability, no extra power bricks required to bring along for the ride. And if you're rocking a MacBook Pro like this, the battery life will last you a few hours, at least a session outdoors at a library, for instance, or at a share space at an office. So yeah, a really great mobile little workstation solution for those who aren't willing to be compromised in terms of software capability. The funny thing is, in regard to all these tablets that I've reviewed over the last few months and over the past few years, is that it's really hard to not get a good one. Like, they're all amazing tablets. The build quality is really good. The functionality is all there. And yeah, I don't think you'd be at a loss to go with a Huion or an alternative to Wacom or anything like that. I think they're really, really cool. Alright, so rounding out the video here, we have to do the rendering. So setting up the textures for the final render. Now, setting that up is really easy using the Node Wrangler add-on that is included in Blender. So basically all you got to do is, when you're exporting out from Substance Painter, you can use the Blender preset, and it will set up all the naming schemes from Substance Painter to match Blender's recognition, I guess you can say, or match Blender's standards. And Node Wrangler will pick those up instantly and just link up all the textures as easy as piss. Now, with Maya and stuff like that, you have cool add-ons like Substance to Arnold, which basically just links it up all instantly, but not in the case with Blender. Now, for the rest of the scene, I was not prepared to go ahead and model all of those hills and all of the skies and get all the volumetrics to work and all that sort of crap. If you are going to be doing a stylized image such as this, you are probably much better off just doing a matte painting. So a matte painting is basically a 2D image that you make in Photoshop or Procreate or whatever, and then you use it as a plate, as they are called, in the background of your 3D render. And that basically saves you hours and hours and hours of time not having to worry about creating all these extra assets. Now, this is a really great way to do early 3D concept work as well, where you don't have to worry about creating all that stuff as well. And then on top of that, once you've got the render the way that you like, you can do a little bit of compositing in Blender or in After Effects or in Photoshop of your 3D render to give it that extra oomph. So that's the really cool way of doing this. It saves so much more time, it's really effective, and you get the instant mood that you got from the concept art as well. Now, for the extra little bits of detail that I had in my concept art, like the plants, I'm actually just going to be using the grease pencil tool to draw in some detail. Now, these are by no means realistic. They're not going to catch any light or anything like that, but I don't want them to. It's meant to be stylized, so again, I don't care. And it works just as well for this particular design. So yeah, grease pencil, 3D, matte paintings, perfect. Now, before we wrap this up, I also want you to note that the background was actually repurposed from the original concept art. So we've come full circle in this project. Now, that's what I mean by doing these sort of mini projects as well. Don't disregard every single step. Don't skip every single step, because each step is important and you may find yourself reusing that information in the future for the final render. Okay, so with a few final tweaks of the shaders, going in and out and playing with different parameters, we're pretty much done here. Now, as you can see, the render there is looking a little bit flat, and that's because we need to do a little bit of compositing. Now, I'm not going to show you a little bit of that in this video because it'll just take too much time, but just note that I have done a little bit of compositing inside of the Blender compositor. So add a little bit more contrast, played with a few values, that sort of thing to get the final result. Okay, so with the texturing done, all linked up in the Blender, let's check out the final render and see what we were able to make in a mobile workstation environment. Now, I think this came out really, really well. I really enjoyed this process. I love doing these cartoony, silly things every now and then as well. It's more up my alley as an artist, actually, to do this over, say, doing super realism or even just a lot of humanoid character design as well. I like doing that, but sometimes just doing crazy, silly stuff like this is really fun too. And I think this has proven as well how capable this setup is. So if you're looking for a mobile workstation environment that you can use outdoors or around the house or anywhere for that matter without having to have a massive desktop setup, I would consider this as an option. This method of small tablet display with a small laptop, and see how you go. But yeah, that's it from this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to put comments down below. If you want to download the original files for this, so the actual file featured in this video, sign up to Patreon. You get access to the source files here, plus an ad-free version of this video as well. So with that being said, thank you for watching. Catches and have fun. Cheers.